Hey everyone, just coming to you with this public service announcement. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. So let me explain. First and foremost, it's free to do so. You don't got to come out of your pocket. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole bunch of others platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. That's why I got on it. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, peace. Peace. We are back once again with Masterminds with Brother Shem, and I'm your host, Brother Shem, and excited to get back once again, another week, another episode. And on this episode, we're going to talk about, as we usually do, the higher self and the lower self, but this will go a lot deeper into self-talk, the conversations that we have, the thoughts that go in within our mind, how to recognize those energy vampires, as they like to call them. The title of this is entitled When God and the Devil Have a Talk. And we're going to go into how to defend yourself against these energy vampires, some say psychic vampires and things of that nature. And we're going to just touch on it for a brief while. There's a lot to go into that, but we're going to touch on it for the short time that we have. But before I get into that and I start reading, I always start off with the reading. Before I do that, I first like to, as always, thank everyone who continue to listen to this podcast, who continue to support. Definitely, if this is your first time or if you've been a repeat listener, welcome. And feel free to check out my website, shemel.com. That's SHEM-EL.com, where you can check out all of my podcast episodes, as well as check out my books that I have available and other products as well. A lot of times I read from my books, pages from my books, and if you're interested in getting those books, you can definitely just go to my website, shemel.com, and get that and order that. So, and again, that's SHEM-EL.com. So after doing that quick plug, we can get into everything. Oh, also just another announcement. As I usually like to encourage everyone, for those of you who want to be heard on this podcast, definitely reach out. If you're on Anchor, if you're listening to Anchor, you can leave a voice message. You can leave your question, thoughts, your feedback, just whatever you have on your mind, just anything you want to share, and I will listen to it. And I would love to place that on the following podcast. And then as such, I can be able to actually answer that question if you have a question for me or anything else you want to share. All right. So I'm going to go into the Circle 7 as I always do. I start off. This particular time, I'm going to go into chapter 15 of the Circle 7. And I'm going to read the entire chapter and then touch on this topic. So chapter 15 starts off as such. The harbinger had paved the way. The Logos had been introduced to men as love made manifest, and he must now begin his divine ministry. And he went forth into the wilderness to be alone with Allah, that he might look into his inner heart and note its strength and worthiness. And with himself he talked. He said, "My lower self is strong. By many ties I am bound to carnal life. Have I the strength to overcome and give my life a willing sacrifice for men? When I shall stand before the face of men and they demand a proof of my messiahship, what will I say?" And then the tempter came and said, "If you be the Son of Allah, command these stones to turn to bread." And Jesus said, "Who is it that demands a test? It is no sign that one is a son of Allah because he does a miracle. The devils can do mighty things. Did not the Gentile magicians do great things before the Pharaoh? My words and deeds in all the walks of life shall be the proof of my messiahship." And then the tempter said, "If you will go into Jerusalem and from the temple pinnacle cast down yourself to earth, the people will believe you are the Messiah sent from Allah. This you can surely do. For did not David say, he gives his angels charge concerning you? And with their hands will they uphold, lest you shall fall." And Jesus said, "I will not tempt the Lord my God Allah." And then the tempter said, "Look forth upon the world. Behold its honors and its fame. Behold its pleasures and its wealth. If you will give your life to these, they shall be yours." But Jesus said, "Away from me all tempting thoughts. My heart is fixed. I spurn this carnal self with all its vain ambition and its pride." For 40 days did Jesus wrestle with his carnal self. His higher self prevailed. He then was hungry. But his friends had found him, and they ministered to him. Then Jesus left the wilderness, and in the consciousness of holy breath, he came into the camps of John and taught. So that is chapter 15 of the Circle 7. Now, for those of you who have not been checking out my podcast, not familiar, for those who are new, this is a podcast in which I read excerpts from a book known as the Circle 7. Also is known as the Holy Quran and the Moor Science Temple of America, which is actually a compilation of various lessons that had already existed, and it was put together by a man named Noble Drew Ali, who was born in the state of North Carolina in the year 1886. So just want to give that out there because I know I always get new listeners, even though it's in the description as to what this episode, or I should say this podcast is about. So the reason for this particular episode, this is actually me expounding on a lesson that I was teaching and building on a discussion actually last night on this subject. And this is in connection with a part of the Moorish questionnaire, which are also some teachings taught in the Moor Science Temple. And there are two questions, question 74, or key, what they call key 74 and key 75. Those questions being first, what did the higher self say to the lower self at one time when he met him? And the answer to that is, "Where are you going, Satan?" And the follow follow-up question. The following question is, what was the answer that the lower self gave to the higher self? And the answer to that is, I'm going to and fro in the earth seeking whom I may devour. Okay? So that, along with chapter 15 of the Circle 7, is really talking about the battle between the higher self and the lower self, which goes inside, which takes place inside your mind. So that's your self-talk. So we want to get into that. Also, the concept of energy vampires. Not only are those outside of you, because I've seen many, different presentations on YouTube, podcasts, and they talk about psychic vampires, and very good information. A lot of it deals with things that technically deal outside of you, and that is true. But it's also, a lot of it takes place, most of it actually takes place within, and we're going to deal with that. And that ties in with another, this will be in conjunction, and you can actually listen to those podcasts, the episodes of Inner Enemy. I always get that messed up. Inner Enemy, study of the lower self, right? And that's one episode. And then the other episode that I did was The Devil Defined Within Moor Science. So both of those episodes are very key, and they tie in with this on how to, want to expound more on how to build your psychic self-defense. And that term psychic self-defense, which I heard a lot, me coming into this consciousness, was taught by different teachers. I just recently found out was actually a term that was coined back in the 1930s by a particular occultist. Used that term psychic self-defense. Is actually the name of a book that was written by this particular person. And also the term psychic vampire is also a term that goes back into the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. That was coined, or was claimed to be created by a man named Anton LaVey, who was the founder of the Church of Satan, and wrote a book. There's actually a lot of pictures out circulating of him with different famous people, such as Marilyn Manson. What's his other? He passed. Sammy Davis Jr. He started out in California in, I believe, 1966. Around the same time, Ronald Wilson Reagan was governor of the state of California. There's a reason why I said Ronald Wilson Reagan. Count the letters. But anyway, that being said, what I'm getting into in reference to this lesson is basically a conversation about what this meant. So in this story that we read in chapter 15, which is a story of Jesus going into the wilderness, this is not a physical wilderness. This is actually basically him going within in the mind. And also this is dealing with him fasting for 40 days, because later on in the end it says, for 40 days did Jesus wrestle with his carnal self, his higher self prevailed, and he then was hungry, because this was a fasting that he went through. So in the wilderness of the mind, you have many thoughts that just ramble through. In the course of a day, it's been said by scientists that we get tens of thousands of thoughts through our mind in the course of a day, 24-hour period. And though we may not consciously identify with each one of those thoughts have the potential to very much so have an effect, particularly in the subconscious mind. Remember, you have 3 parts of the mind: the superconscious, the conscious, and the subconscious. So the subconscious is something that, while most people do not consciously think about, it is that part of your mind that has a potential to really affect you. And there are people, adepts, masters, people who know psychology, who know this, and they know how to plant thoughts in your mind, and a thought is a seed. So we have to be aware of this. So in the story, one of the key things that you get is that even in the very beginning, where he talked with himself, right? And he's having, in this story, he's talking to himself, and he's expressing doubt, self-doubt. My lower self is strong. By many ties I'm bound to carnal life. Have I the strength to overcome? Right? So there's a question. He's questioning his own inner ability to actually overcome this carnal self. And that's what most of us have. Most of us deal with this on a daily basis. We deal with self-doubt. We doubt we can be as smart, as pretty, as strong, as wealthy. We doubt ourselves. It's part of the conditioning. Institutionalized religion is part of that. Your environment is part of that conditioning. The institutions of oppression against people of different backgrounds, whether it's institutionalized, systematic, I should say, racism, white supremacy, whether it's sexism, things of that nature. All these different things play a part. These are filters that are added in. You're born in sin. All these different things are planted in your mind from a child, right? And are crystallized as you get older. So you deal with self-doubt all the time. Even the person who looks like they have it going on, right? They have something in their subconscious mind that is rooted in self-doubt. So that's what the first thing that this deals with. So with that said, that lets you know that the carnal self, right? That little demon on your shoulder. Remember the cartoons like Tom and Jerry and stuff like that? Honest to my brother Roz Bay who gave that analogy about, in the cartoon you'll have the angel on one end, on one shoulder, and on the other shoulder you'll have the demon, right? And that demon will say, nah, you know what, you should do this. I don't listen to him, right? Because that is feeding into your doubt and desire. Because the carnal self, as mentioned in chapter 3 of the Circle 7, is the body of desires, right? The lower self, the carnal self, the body of desires is a reflection of higher self, distorted by the murky ethers of the flesh, right? So, and also, when they talk about the evil that we deal with, that we're so afraid of, it says that this evil is a myth. These gods are made of air, clothed with the shadow of a thought. Not clothed with a thought, but the shadow of a thought. That is a byproduct, a manifest. That is the residue, the murky residue of the thought that lingers. We talked about ether in the earlier podcast. What is ether? This is the ether of a lower vibration that still exists. Gods made of air, ether, right? That lower frequency ether, right? that negative ether that exists, that we feed into, that take real effect on our subconscious mind, and thus controls our thoughts, our emotions, and things of that nature. So that's one. And then, so now that opens up the door. So if you ever notice, this happens in advertisements. Advertisements is another way of saying adverse enticements. An adverse enticement is an advertisement. So this adverse enticement, this advertisement will tell you, hey, do you no longer feel attractive? You can't, do you lack energy? Do you tired all the time? Ask these questions. First, it sets the stage by having you doubt yourself. Yeah, I do get sleepy. I ain't feeling the way I used to be. I sure would like to look pretty. Wouldn't you like to have more money than you ever have? All that, all this is creating the doubt. That's the demonstration that you see in chapter 15. Because even there, it's like you get that conversation with the tempter, which they would say is the devil or Satan, right? Go ahead. If you do this, all the people will love you. Behold his honor, the fame, the pleasure, the wealth. Just give your life to these, and they shall be yours. The pursuit of happiness. When it's really a state of mind. They associate happiness with the material things, when happiness or heaven is a state of mind. You create it in your own mind. So, and then to the response, Jesus said, away from me all tempting thoughts. My heart is fixed. I spurn this carnal self with all its vain ambition and pride. Vain ambition and pride. Pride comes before the fall, right? So you have that where, where that thing is promoted, you can be so much more. You can be this, right? Don't do that. That's beneath you. This is conversations that go on. You'll hear from people outside of you. A lot of times your closest friends and family will have that conversation, but this is also the conversation that you'll have within. And that whole thing with the questions that I asked about what did the higher self say to the lower self and what was the answer that the lower self gave to the higher self, that conversation is found in the book of Job, specifically chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, and we'll go into that a little later. But that being said, we have to understand that this temptation can only exist if a person is attached to the things of the world, right? Away from me all tempting thoughts, my heart is fixed, right? I spurn this carnal life, right? I spurn this carnal self. So, but if you really are truly attached, you really do, you want something more in this physical life, that opens the door to be tempted, right? A man who is, that's why they have that saying, everybody has a price. In other words, they're trying to say not so much that anybody will go for money. Sometimes the price is not always money. Sometimes the price is just wanting to be loved, wanting to be accepted. A person, that child who wasn't accepted, or that person who wasn't accepted as a child, may be more prone to do certain things, not for any money, just to be accepted, right? It's like the music business. You hear about these artists that get jerked for millions and millions of dollars, and some of them know they got bad contracts, and they sign a bad contract knowing it, right? Remind me of just seeing what was that show? The new thing on Netflix. that had Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, where the character played by Chadwick Boseman had, made an agreement to sell his songs, and he was just, the guy just played him and just gave him $5, right? Knowing this guy, he knew the guy wasn't, he knew the guy could snake him. He knew he was of that type. He was smiling in his face and everything. Why? Because he wanted to record his songs. That's a real life thing. Like people, there are people who just want to be heard. Like, man, I got to go all around the world and do this, that, and the third, and then they got a story, but they're struggling. But they're struggling now. They're hurting. They ain't getting no royalties, no publishing, nothing, right? Sold their soul, signed their soul to the devil, so to speak, right? Because there was something missing. It was a void. And that's what happens in everyday life that will cause us to just forfeit our true birthright. That ties back to chapter 1 of the Circle 7, where it says that man is the Lord of all the plane of manifest, of protoplasm, of mineral, of plant, of beast, but he gave up his lost estate. But he gave up his lost estate, his heritage. I apologize, not lost estate, but he gave up his birthright just to gratify his lower self. But man will regain his lost estate, his heritage. So man is the Lord of all the plane of manifest, of protoplasm, of mineral, of plant, of beast, but he gave up his birthrights just to gratify his lower self. So your birthright is of a divine nature. So you surrender your divinity to gratify your physical self, your lower self, your carnal self, the sex, the women, the drugs, the money, or just the acceptance. People to say your name, have your name in lights, to be noticed. All these different things are part of the lower self. It's all based on desire. Buddha said desire is the lead to suffering, right? So these things that exist allow for the temptation to take place, allow for you to fall victim. So the key to fighting off that, right, and we're going to get more deeper later on into the thought forms, is, and I'll reiterate it, is the act of detachment. You have to train your mind your mind for the jewels of your soul, to be able to detach from all things that are finite and really tap into that which is truly infinite, which is your higher self, which is spirit, right? Because man is not the body nor the soul. He's a spirit and a part of the omnipotent. So you have to be in that consciousness of that. So that's a process, that takes going into the wilderness, so to speak, the self-examination. That's what it is. It's called self-examination. That's the first part. But self-examination leads to the self-realization. And there has to be a purification, because purity paved the way for love. So these are things you have to be conscious of. And once you're conscious of these things, then and only then can you truly work it to be in a state that works for your benefit and be able to defend against those attacks. So that is very important. And on the next half, we'll go deeper into those thought forms and how they work and how others can work them against you and what you can do to protect yourself. Now, each thought produces a dual effect, right? So I just want to put this in context. So remember I said that thought is a seed, as mentioned in chapter 1 of the Circle 7. Okay, so this is very important. So there's a dual effect of a thought, at the very beginning. The first is a vibration, okay? Like a vibratory wave that emanates from a thought. The second is the creation of a thought form. So first is the vibration, and then there's a thought form. This is important because this is where emotions come into play. So, as I've mentioned before, in order to get a good emotion, you have to have a good thought. A positive emotion stems from a positive thought. That's the seed that produces, because it gives the vibration. The vibration is the vibratory, that vibe, as you mentioned, the vibe, the feeling. You feel a vibe. So momently, the thought can trigger a feeling, okay? And then that feeling, that emotion, can solidify into a form, right? So I'm going to dive a little deeper into the second effect more so. And the reason why this is important is because this ties exactly to the topic at hand. So, okay, we move in a sea of energy, okay? Like, basically, we're surrounded by energy. And that's what I talked about in the ether. What is ether episode. So this sea of energy is responsive to thought, right? So there's even been tests that have been done on water, where if you send certain thought forms, if you say certain things to the water, it changes the crystallization of the water molecules, and you can actually charge it in a positive way or a negative way, depending on that thought form that you send forth, that thought that you send off to the water. This ties in with plants, how you talk to the plants, talk to animals, and talk to each other, okay? You can actually just thought, even without talking, you can give a look. I remember thinking back when my grandmother on my father's side, I loved her dearly. I love her dearly. And I remember when I was a child, I laughed at something on the TV. I can't even remember what it was. And my grandmother loved watching her shows. Man, when I tell you she cut her eye at me, If looks could kill, I'd be in intensive care. And she gave me a look like I never saw. And it hurt me to the core. I started crying immediately. I remember that clear as day. And the reason why is because, for one, I knew she wasn't happy. Two, I was so used to her seeing her, look at me in a positive light, look at me with loving eyes. And when she looked at me, oh man, she didn't even touch me. But that look made me cry as a child. I remember that distinctly. But that was a thought. There was a thought behind it. I didn't know exactly what the words of the thought were, but it wasn't good. So that being said, that's where we're getting into the thought form. So the thought becomes each thought becomes a living thing, particularly when you nurture that thing. When you nurture a thought, it grows, right? It's a seed. And I talk about it in my book, Who is Elohim? Because the question is asked in the Moor's questionnaire, who is Elohim? Elohim is the seven created spirits that created everything that ever was, is, and ever more to be. And when I speak about creativity and thought, I always say that thought is defined as an idea, plan, conception, or opinion produced by mental activity. So, and the etymology of the word thought, the etymology of the word thought comes from the Old English word meaning to conceive of in the mind. So this provides insight into the fact that a thought is a conception, i.e. a birth. You're giving birth to something. That which you give birth to grows. It becomes its own creation. Thought grows by way of creativity, right? And some believe that the word thought comes from the name Thoth, which is the Kemetic deity, also known as Tahuti, in which you get Hermes in Greek, right? And then you got the sacred wisdom of Tahuti, which is where you get the Hermetic teaching, Hermeticism, where you get the Kabbalion and everything of that nature. But in that, creativity comes from the Latin word creatus, which means to grow, right? Speaking that creation is not just a poof and there it is. You know what I'm saying? It's not a magic trick. It's a process. Creation is a process that takes place over time. So in that, we're saying that the actual thought becomes a living thing with the thought force acting as its soul, for lack of a better word, the essence, right? The essence of that thought form is its body. So each thought kind of manifests in the same way as we do, because its own soul takes on a soul and a body in the same way as well, the microcosm of the macrocosm, because we also took on a body of soul and took on a body of flesh. So, and then it affects and it manifests into the thing of reality, such as you have a thought to become an entrepreneur or real estate investor, and it's a thought. You could have been dead broke living in a shack in the projects or wherever, and all of a sudden the thought hits. But if you nurture that thought, all of a sudden you're a wealthy real estate investor, saying this, could you believe I used to live in this mobile home? I used to live in the projects or what, right? And then the people you came up from, they're still living in the projects, or still living wherever they living, and that's not to knock anybody where they live. I'm just giving that contrast. And then you see, what's the difference? The difference is the thought and your attention to that thought. It's the attention. See, remember earlier I talked about the advertisements, the adverse enticements. The whole purpose of every advertisement, if you see an ad in the beginning of or in the middle of a YouTube video, right? The whole purpose is to get your attention. Once they get your attention, that's the hook, right? You see that ad about, starting an Amazon business, becoming a millionaire on Amazon, and then also, oh wow, I can do this. And then you all of a sudden you join this webinar, click the link below or above, and I'll give you this free training, and the free training, at the end of the free training, there's going to be an offer, to buy this, right? You think they're doing it for free? They're doing it out of the kindness of their heart? No, there's something in it. But no, get this free training. So it goes without saying that the attention was grabbed. It's all about grabbing the attention. There are corporations that spend millions and millions of dollars, some up to the billions of money just for advertising and marketing. That's all they want. They'll spend money just to get your attention because they know their whole purpose is to do what they call transfer leads into prospects, from prospects into customers, right? Call it lead conversion, right? To lead, right? You're being led to this. Think about that, being led. Led what? Led astray in some cases. So even with that, because your attention is on the thing that they offer you in the mind, which deals with the power of the mind and how to control your mind, you will ignore everything else that may even be before your face. So thus, if an artist comes out and plays good music, calls himself the Pied Piper, right? You'll ignore the fact that he was telling you all along that he was a pedophile in his music. So say things like that. So, it goes without saying, but I couldn't help myself. I had to say that. But anyway, that just lets you know, because the attention of it, you're grabbed into that. And that's even in speaking of music, the feeling that goes back to the thought of the feeling, the vibe. You get the vibe of that music. That music feels so good. It feels so good. You can go into a church where the preacher is crooked. You know what I'm saying? Not saying all preachers are crooked, but you can go to this church and this pastor is crooked, right? He's doing all types of dirt. But the choir, boy, that choir, the lead singer of that choir, she can turn it out and blow the house down. Like, she sings, she'll give you goosebumps and make you cry. You just feel the spurt when you in that church listening to that choir. But and the reverend, he can move you with them words. But all types of debauchery, it came out to your attention, is going down on it. But oh man, but I still feel the spirit when I go there. Yeah, you'll ignore all of that. I'm just giving examples, but this is a reality. This happens all the time. Where people will ignore the obvious because that's not where their attention is at. Their attention is on that which appeals to their pleasure. Remember, we talked about the pleasure in chapter 15, the pleasure, the wealth. Remember in chapter 3, where it talks about the lower self, and I go into this in the book, What is the Devil Sometimes Called? You have to remember what it says about the lower self. It says that the lower self is rich in promises. Chapter 3, verse 12. The lower self is rich in promises, but poor in blessedness and peace. It offers pleasure, joy, and satisfying gain, but gives unrest, misery, and death. It gives men apples that are lovely to the eye and pleasant to the smell. Their cores are full of bitterness and gall. So this lower self, which is the carnal self, and so many promises, so much that you can hope for, right? It's all about what the smell is like. All dealing with the senses. What does the smell like? Oh, it smells good. Oh, she smells so good when she walks by, knowing that she could be the type of woman who's not a virtuous woman, but she smells good. She looks good, right? She looks so impeccable. You thinking about the pleasure that you can get being with that woman, right? Or for some, the women want to be with that man or whatever. So you're thinking about the pleasure and you're not thinking about what's behind that. Remember I talked about the illusion, and man knows not by being told, right? Power is an illusion. Oh, it's so powerful. It's in control. It's all an illusion. So getting further into this aspect of the thought forms, right? Another thing for a thought form, some people call it an elemental, right? So if the thought is about someone else, right? This thought form or this elemental can move to that other person. So you can think a thought. So some people don't even have to talk to you. That's how well guarded you need to keep your mind. And that's why I said medium is one of the greatest tools used against you. It makes you open. Certain things we see on YouTube, on TV, social media, things we would never have even thought about, right? You scroll through a feed, an Instagram feed, and all of a sudden this thing pops up and be like, oh, what's that? And you could even be repulsed by it, but now it's in your mind. Now it's stuck there. It's in your subconscious. You may think it's not affecting you, but it's affecting you. Okay? So a thought, you can think about somebody or have a thought of somebody, and you can actually transpose that thought into that person's subconscious. And it discharges the qualified energy upon their mental body. You have a mental body, right? Now, if the thought is about your own self, right, then it will hover about ready to react on whatever you created whenever you're in a relaxed state. Okay? So let's use this for an example. This is how thoughts work. Okay, so let's say you're fond of a particular type of food. You love chocolate cake. Devil's food. Right? You may think about eating that cake along with some we'll just use a term of what's a popular dish. I don't know. Chicken Alfredo. Okay? Some Italian food, right? So you're looking at having this meal. So like, man, I remember, or I thought I saw this on YouTube and it looks good. You may not even had this. Okay? But let's say you're fond of this type of food and you know this food, it's not the best for you. You trying to watch your weight. You said this year was going to be a new year. You gave a resolution. And then you're working. You're concentrating on your job. You're doing whatever. And you're not consciously thinking about it. You ain't even thinking about it. But you're naturally fond of this food. Okay? That thought form is hanging over you like a cloud. Right? Unbeknownst to you consciously. And then when you leave work, once you're not focused, once you have broken the focus of doing whatever your task was at hand, and your attention is no longer concentrated on it, that craving, you know what? I got a craving for some chocolate cake. I gotta have it. Right? You know what? The thought came to me to have some donuts. You know what I mean? I don't know where this thought come from. The thought was always there. It was already there. It just didn't break through because you was focused on something else. That goes back to chapter 15, where it says, away from me all tempting thoughts. My heart is fixed. Heart of the mind. Okay? So we have to be conscious of that. The heart of the mind. Being fixed on a certain thing, and by it being fixed on that thing, right, we can now be able to ward off the other things. Okay? So something that the masters taught was that eternal thought is one. In essence, it is two, intelligence and force. And when they breathe, a child is born. This child is love. Okay? Now, what does that mean? The eternal thought is one, but in essence is two. So you have intelligence and force, right? Some would say wisdom and might, or wisdom and will, right? So remember, I said that thought has a dual effect, okay? So your thought has to imply the intelligence or the knowledge or the intellect, of knowing certain things. You know about chocolate cake. You know about how good it tastes. Or you know about real estate. You know what I'm saying? You know of it. You have certain knowledge of it. You may not know everything, but you know, hey, these people got rich off of real estate. That's a thought. That's the intelligence part. And the force is the will. The will is that power. Not the power, but the force is that will to make it happen. Like, look, I can go out here and get out here and get this money off of real estate. Or I can go out here and get this cake. Or I can go out here and get these drugs. I can sip on this lean. Or I can go out here and party, and I can do this. Or I can get this girl. Or a whole myriad of things you can choose, right? When they breathe, a child is born. A child is love. Now that love, in this particular case, can be positive or negative, right? You can have a love for that thing, that thought, that affinity. It's the affinity, basically. Okay? That's where you get the vibration and the form. Okay? So now, the same thing that would apply to the food, right? Where a person wasn't really hungry, all of a sudden, once they break the concentration, now they hunger. It developed a real hunger. Right? So, in the mind, not like you're starving, like you collapse, but like, you really hungry, you desire, a hunger of a desire. So the desire for the food is but a reaction to the thought. That's all it is. It's a groove, like a groove in a record. It's an imprint. It's a stamp. It's a program in a computer. And that computer is your brain, your mind. This would same be true of a person who harbors impure thoughts, right? Or real, I would say, detrimental thoughts. Depraved thoughts. Now that may be seen like, oh man, it's just cake. But what about if it's drugs? What about if it's murder? You know what I'm saying? Now in religion, they would say that this is being tempted by the devil. Thus the story in chapter 7, not chapter 7, but chapter 15 of the Circle 7, where it talks about self-examination and Jesus being tempted by the tempter, or would be the devil, right? But in actuality, those are just allegories that deals with your own thought creations within you that return and demand attention and indulgence. So it's these thoughts that come in your head. Oh man, you gotta go ahead, do this. Man, you better go get that. Oh, you ain't gotta do that. It's that back and forth. Where are you going, Satan? I'm going to and fro in the earth, seeking whom I may devour. Right? I'm going to and fro in the earth, seeking whom I may devour. Right? So that's where it says one day, right? The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also was amongst them, right? That's what it actually says in the actual book. That's Job chapter 1 verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also amongst them. And then following after that, in verse 7, it says, And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And we know that that was the analogy of what happens within. Anyone who knows the book of Job knows it's a book dealing with the faith of Job being tested, where Satan basically said, he's only being blessed. He's only praising you and faithful to you because you give him everything. If you take everything away from him, he'll curse you. Right? And so that's the test. They made a wager. It's basically a wager between God and the devil, when God and the devil talk. But this is all allegory of what takes place within. Right? Right? Your mind. Your mind can be your best friend or your worst enemy. You can actually sabotage yourself with thoughts. That's why you have to be careful what you think. Right? So when the attention is otherwise engaged, the thought forms can be held aside and submerged subconsciously. Okay? And as soon as the mind relaxes, it will fill up the conscious mind. Okay? So we have to be very careful, right, in learning to have proper control of our thoughts and emotion. Until we do that, you are indulging in a world of illusion. The plane of things made manifest, right? That's the lower self. Nothing is quite the way it seems. It may appear to be such, but that's not what it really is. Okay? People may say, I don't know how this affects me. I don't see this and all this. That's spooky. Okay? But thoughts are silent and invisible. So every thought tends to reproduce itself in a physical form, in one form or another. So we have to avoid chaotic thinking and learn to think with reason. Okay? So that's one thing we have to do. And we have to avoid untruthful or distorted thinking. Okay? The distorted and untruthful thinking is based on vain imagination, which is rooted in fear. Right? We talk about the acronym of fear, false evidence appearing real, where your fears, and yet that's why you have to address those things that have been programmed in you, as I talked about, and get to the root of that and be able to observe it and see that's where you're getting this imagination from. And and when it attacks you mentally, that's why meditation is key. You can be able to spot it for what it is and then discard it. And in addition to this correction and counterbalance, you have to adopt a positive attitude. Adopting the positive attitude is rooted in the awareness and confidence in yourself. Remember, in the beginning, I stated that in the story, it said that Jesus was questioning himself. There was self-doubt. So the opposite of self-doubt is self-confidence. And self-confidence is brought about by self-realization, self-knowledge. And that comes through self-examination. You have to know that the divine is within you. You are God and children of the Most High. So with that, I thank you for listening to this podcast. And until next time, peace and love.